Snyder. First off, I think I'm going to give out my contact information because I forget every week. I kind of run out of time and fall off the edge of the platform. So for those who want to contact me, please do so at one of the following two emails, either at Dinah Everett Snyder, all one word, Dinah Everett Snyder at hotmail.com, or at Canary Chronicles at outlook.com. And on that note, I wanted to thank some of my regular listeners for their wonderful emails, including Mason, Josh, and Michael. I've already responded, but, it's wonderful when people write in and have comments about previous shows, because it helps guide me into what it is that people are interested in listening to. So I'm always incredibly appreciative for the emails that I do get. So this week, it's kind of a mixed bag. Life is a mixed bag. I'm going to talk about President Obama. I'm going to talk about Michelle Obama. And I'm going to talk about all the ways in which they have let us down. I'm going to start off the show, in that case, with a list of the 7 deadly sins. And they would be pride, envy, anger, sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust. Very simple, 7 of them. And then there's the 7 heavenly virtues: chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility. I am a proponent, I'm a huge advocate of Googling information. And there's a lot to be read about the provenance and the story behind the 7 deadly sins, as well as the 7 heavenly virtues. So for those who are interested, you can go and Wikipedia them, because there is a lot of interesting information around the definitions of these words and why they were chosen to be the ones, the 7. And of course, then there's an expansion of some others that used to be included and were dropped, or things that should be included and are not. But I think it was important for me to start this evening's show with these, because we have a distinct absence of all of this in our society today. We have an absence of humility. We have an absence of charity. We have an absence of kindness. But we have far too much of an abundance of pride, of envy, of anger, of slothful behavior, of greed, of gluttony, and of lust. And none exhibit that more so than our politicians and our CEOs of all of our corporations. So, to get started, the true unemployment numbers, according to the think tanks, is at 32.8%. The true underemployment numbers are at 41% plus. So it is a shy and reclusive recovery, much like the new economy and all those promised new economy jobs. They don't exist. Of course, Congress must have seen those jobs before they went home for Christmas, because our representatives let the extended unemployment benefits expire for 1.3 million unemployed Americans who have not yet met up with those economic jobs, or even with the old economy jobs for that matter. So Congress figures that they have saved 1.3 million Americans from becoming lifelong bums of the nanny state and living off the public purse. After all, who on earth do these unemployed Americans think they are? A bank too big to fail? A pharmaceutical company? The military-industrial complex? Or perhaps they think they're on a par with Israel? What the unemployed need to do is to form a lobby organization and make campaign contributions. Then they will be noticed by Congress and our president. Just as economists don't recognize facts that are inconsistent with corporate grants and career ambitions and being on the speaking circuit, our representatives don't recognize facts inconsistent with campaign contributions. For example, our representatives in the White House tells us that Obamacare is a worthy program, even though those that are supposed to be helped by it aren't, because of large deductibles, co-pays, Medicaid estate recovery, a system that you can't even sign up for despite its billion price tag now. And I think there's 27 states plus Ohio that are refusing Obamacare. Thank you very much. All it took for Obamacare was campaign contributions from the insurance industry to turn a policy that hurts most and helps none into a worthy program. Worthy, of course, only for the insurance companies. Wall Street has, of course, stated that the companies that are most likely and most assuredly to benefit from this are a very small group of special interest groups on the stock market. Coincidentally, isn't that strange? Keep in mind that it's the people who could not afford medical insurance who have had to come up with their part of the premium or pay a penalty. How do people who have no discretionary income come up with what is to them a large sum of money? They were told that they would be able to afford this. We were told that our premiums would not go up. These are all lies. What are these people going to do? Are they going to eat less, pay less in rent, drive less, dress less, pay less in childcare? If so, what happens to people employed in those industries when demand fails? Because we have Obamacare is gutting the 40-hour work week. This was all too big of a thought for White House occupants, the economists, and our representatives in Congress. Here's some crazy statistics for you. According to the official wage statistics for 2010, 40% of the U.S. workforce earned less than $20,000. 53% earned less than $30,000, and 73% earned less than $50,000. The median wage or salary was $27,519. The amounts are in current dollars, and they are compensation amounts, which are, of course, subject to state and federal income taxes, Social Security, and Medicare payroll taxes. In other words, the take-home pay is far less. To put these incomes into some perspective, the poverty threshold for a family of four in 2013 was $23,550. In recent years, the only incomes that have been growing in real terms are those at the top of the income distribution. Those at the top have benefited from performance bonuses, often acquired by laying off workers or replacing U.S. workers with cheaper foreign labor, and from the rise in stocks and bond prices caused by the Federal Reserve's policy of quantitative easing. Everyone else has experienced a decline in real income and wealth, as only slightly more than 1% of Americans make more than $200,000 annually, and less than 0.4% make $1 million or more annually. There are not enough people with discretionary income to drive the economy with consumer spending. When real median family income and real per capita income ceased to grow and began falling, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan substituted a credit expansion to take the place of the missing growth in income. But as consumers became loaded with debt, of course, it was no longer possible to expand consumer spending with credit expansion. World War II had left the U.S. economy the only undamaged industrial and manufacturing center, so prosperity ensued. But by the 70s, the demand management economy policy had produced stagflation. Reagan's supply-side policy was able to give the U.S. economy another 20 years or so. But the collapse of the Soviet Union brought an era of jobs offshoring to large Asian economies that were formerly close to the Western capital. Of course, there were all these free trade agreements, which were not free, but did ensure a lot of back and forth. Once corporate executives realized that they could earn multi-million-dollar job performance bonuses by moving U.S. jobs abroad, and once they were threatened by Wall Street and shareholder advocates with takeovers if they did not, American capitalism began giving the U.S. economy to other countries, mainly located in Asia. As high productivity manufacturing and professional service jobs such as software engineering moved offshore, U.S. income stagnated and fell. As real income growth stagnated, wives entered the job force to compensate. Children were educated by refinancing the home mortgage and using the equity in the family home, or with student loans that they do not earn enough to repay. Since the December 2007 downturn, Americans have used up their coping mechanisms. Homes have been refinanced, IRAs raided, savings drawn down. Grown children, now adults, are back home with parents. The falling labor force participation rate signals that the economy can no longer provide jobs for the workforce. In such a situation, economic recovery is virtually impossible. What the Treasury and Federal Reserve has done, with the complicity of the White House, Congress, economists, and the media, is to focus on rescuing a half dozen banks that supposedly are too big to fail. The consequence of focusing economic policy on saving the banks is rigged financial markets and a massive stock and bond market bubble that is coming our way, ladies and gentlemen. To protect the dollar's exchange value from quantitative easing, the price of gold has been forced down in the paper futures market, with the consequences that physical gold is shipped to Asia, where it is unavailable as a refuge for Americans faced with currency depreciation. At a time when most Americans are running out of coping mechanisms, the U.S. is facing a certain financial collapse and a high rate of inflation from the dollar depreciation as the Fed pours out newly created money in an effort to support the rigged financial markets. Those markets are all rigged, and they're not rigged to help you or I. They are there to make extraordinary profits for Main Street, Wall Street, and everyone else is suffering. I don't know if anyone's looked at the after Christmas sales performance spreadsheets for any of our big retailers, but it looks like there's going to be some real crashes over there. So I want to head over to this think tank guy. I've spoken about him before, Richard Epstein. He's a Bedford Senior Fellow at a think tank, and he wrote a thing called Our Imbecile Constitution. And I'm going to read something that he wrote. The bad news about our stalled economy is distressing on two fronts. The unemployment rate recently crept back up, and the stock market lost all of its gain from 2012. Today's problems are so pervasive, some argue, that we should rethink the fundamental structure of our Constitution. So, University of Texas law professor Sanford Levison's recent book, Our Undemocratic Constitution, argues for jettisoning our present constitutional structure in favor of a more flexible institutional arrangement that he thinks will prove better adapted to our troubled times. Levison raised the ante by calling the Constitution imbecilic. In fact, he wrote an article called Our Imbecilic Constitution as well, which draws on the Federalist Papers and yada yada's on. And I want you to go and Google it, because our Constitution, of course, has been under a massive assault by our president and his legal team. And so on that, I want to go through some of the things to do directly with Obama. Of course, I mentioned the Unaffordable Health Care Act, and something that you need to know is that it states very clearly that users have no reasonable expectation of privacy. Now, if you want to know what a government-sponsored and mandated health care looks like, ask a veteran. Ask someone who's in the forces, because the VA system has been failing our people absolutely atrociously. And I'm going to read you something about military veterans and their healthcare system. The average claim for veteran benefits takes more than half a year to process. The Department of Veterans Affairs has a backlog of more than 500,000 overdue claims for benefits that are at least 125 days old. In 2009, the number of veterans that had been waiting for more than a year to have their benefits approved were 11,000. Today, the numbers soared to 245,000. Thousands upon thousands of military veterans that are waiting for their claims to be processed are dealing with absolutely horrible injuries. More than 1,600 of them have lost a limb. Many others have lost fingers and toes. At least 156 are blind and waiting surgery. And thousands of others have impaired vision. Of course, we don't know why they have impaired vision, because they haven't seen a doctor yet. More than 177,000 have hearing loss, and more than 350,000 report tinnitus, noise or ringing in the ears that impairs their balance or their quality of life, their ability to get through their day. Thousands are disfigured, as many as 200 of them so badly that they may need face transplants. Are you kidding? And this is exactly what's coming to us under Obamacare. Many doctors are now stepping out of the mainframe of the healthcare paradigm, and you can go and see them, but you are going to process your claim yourself and deal with the insurance companies, not the doctor, because they can't afford to, and they don't want to, and nor should they have to. The whole thing is an abomination, and no pun intended. So I'm going to get to the NDA and all of these other things, but something that very interesting came up, and that was this whole global warming thing. Of course, we've all been having this global warming shoved down our throats for years. And now Obamacare, of course, has called it climate change and put in place all these other things, which I'm not going to get into because it's just that completely and utterly idiotic. So I want you to go and Google Obama's climate change policy. And, of course, nowhere there does he mention the chemtrails and what that is doing. And I want to remind you that in our chemtrail, the ingredients are aluminum, which destroys plants' ability to take up nutrients from the soil, aluminum dioxide, arsenic, and barium salts, which totally change the pH of our soil. They coat all the leaves with a white powdery substance that inhibits the plant's ability to photosynthesize and therefore to grow. Not to mention that it's changing the pH of open bodies of water. Recently in Nevada, thousands and thousands of fish just belly upped and died. And, we can talk about Fukushima, of course, and what that's doing. But all of these bodies of water that are not near the ocean are having extraordinary issues, not only with their fish, but with their tadpoles, their frogs, their dragonflies, and even small animals that are coming to drink the water. We're seeing enormous issues in our circle of life, and of course there is a fallout for humanity. Some of the other things, and you need to Google what these mean and what they do, is thorium and cadmium and chromium and potassium and titanium, magnesium, manganese, and lead. And then, of course, there's mold spores and fungus and a whole host of other things that are just completely horrific. So we have a policy now of climate change that does not address in any way the chemtrails happening in the skies across America. And this goes, of course, to some of Obama's campaign promises. He was going to have, he promised transparency. Well, we have the NDAA. He promised a right to labeling our food. Well, Monsanto's just won some lawsuits, which I'll get into in a second. And so the whole thing goes back to the 7 deadly sins and the 7 heavenly virtues, and you can see that we're all about sin and there are no virtues. So Judicial Watch recently released its list of 10 most wanted corrupt politicians. I did do this last week, but there were enough emails asking me to do it again that here it is. Speaker of the House, John Boehner, CIA Director John Brennan, Senator Saxby Chambliss, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Attorney General Eric Holder, former IRS Commissioner Stephen T. Miller, former IRS official Lois Lerner, former DHS Secretary Janet Napolitano, President Barack Obama, Senator Harry Reid, Health Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, and the dishonorable mentions, which were former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, outgoing Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, incoming Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, former Republican Rick Renzi, and National Security Advisor Susan Rice. I have a particular issue with Susan Rice going into UN Council meetings, and then the second our representatives from Iran stand up, she takes it upon herself to get up and walk out. Now remember, these are the people that represent you on the international platform. So we cannot hope to have meaningful dialogue with other countries if the people that represent us stand up and leave when opportunity presents itself. Of course, another person that I absolutely can't stand is Nancy Pelosi. And Nancy Pelosi several times now has said that Obama should be given dictatorial power to unilaterally raise the debt ceiling to infinity. I live in California, and I'm pleading with Californians, we need to get rid of Nancy Pelosi. Of course, we also need to get rid of Senator Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer. It's time for these old duckies to go home and do some knitting. In July 2011, Republican Sheila Jackson from Texas urged Obama to rule like a dictator on the debt ceiling, and other Democrats like James Clyburn and former President Bill Clinton have also just suggested that Obama bypass Congress and unilaterally raise the debt ceiling. So I know this is all about the debt ceiling, but we have far too many politicians who are urging more corruption in the White House, more corruption in Congress and the Senate, and that from institutions that are, by and large, some of the most corrupt on the planet, and I'm not exaggerating. I want to read you something that Obama recently said, and it goes like this. Oh, we'll come back right after the break. I have to read you this.
If you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan. There is no doubt that the way I put that forward unequivocally ended up not being accurate.
Things you probably don't want to have happen as you head into, as your party at least heads into an election year, as being, the speaker of the lie of the year, as PolitiFact describes it. Let me add to this launching a midterm election year a couple of other statistics. Something like 70% of people believe that the economy will either get worse or stay the same next year. And then I want to show you some demographics. The question was, which party will do a better job of improving the economy? Republicans, 10-point edge. But look at women. Women, pretty much even between the two parties. Urbanites, dead even between the two parties. Hispanics, 12-point lead. Right? 25, 35. Yes, 12-point lead. These are all demographics that Republicans have had a hard time attracting. Add all this up for me and tell me about the outcome of how will those 2014 elections come out?
Well, look, it doesn't, I think, necessarily mean that Hispanics and urbanites and women are going to go Republican in the next election. But what it could mean is that the Democratic base going into the midterm elections is demoralized, doesn't show up to vote, and that would contribute, if that's what happens, to a wave election for Republicans.
The thing about the healthcare issue, though, is that also in that NBC Wall Street Journal poll, the question was asked, what's the lens by which you've viewed the president thus far? And it's healthcare overwhelmingly. So what voters are doing is they're looking at the disastrous rollout of the healthcare bill, and that's also coloring their views of everything. The president's credibility has taken a big hit. That hasn't come back yet. And I think that's also impacting the way that they see the president and his party as their ability to actually do something positive for the economy. So if you're the Republican Party right now, of course, you want to be able to talk about the economy and how you're going to make things better. But at the same time, by focusing on the problems with Obamacare, you're reinforcing the concerns of Americans that this Democratic-controlled government, or the White House, they can't handle anything.
And Dana, we saw this week the White House push back a couple more deadlines for the Affordable Care Act. That's not reassuring.
No, not at all. Now, if you were to read these numbers in October of next year, we could safely say this is going to be a disaster for the Democrats. But, it was just a month or two ago when we were predicting a disaster for Republicans because of the shutdown areas. These things can swing back and forth. This is a low point. We don't know if it's the lowest, but it is a very low point in the Obama administration. It doesn't help to have neutral groups calling you the liar of the year. Although Ted Cruz says he doesn't believe those fact checkers, so I guess the president has some good company.
Has an ally.
The problem for the president is it's not likely that this is going to go away, and that's the issue. It's not just that it's not just the website; it's his credibility that's taken a hit. And every time there's somebody who loses access to their doctor, who currently has health care, loses access to the doctor that they love, loses the free benefits that they were getting from their current health care. Right? They have to pay more. They have to do something else. It's going to bring that PolitiFact lie thing right back again. It's going to be in every single ad that you will see in 2014, linked to every single Democrat who voted for it, and quite frankly, for those who weren't even there when it was voted on.
Even in previous low points, the president has benefited from high personal favorability rating, and he's taken a hit to his honesty, his perceived trustworthiness. That's hard to come back from.
And would you agree, Dana, as a final question, that this election has this framework? For Democrats, it's Republicans obstruct everything. They get in our way. They shut down the government. They don't care about you. For Democrats is, you want big government? Let's take a look at health care.
That's going to be how they're pitching it, but that's all background noise compared to how people out there are feeling about their jobs next November. The numbers are getting better clearly from what you've indicated there. People don't feel it yet, but they've got 10, 11 months to start feeling that. So that's what will drive it.
President Obama warned Congress today that he means to move his economic agenda one way or the other. At a cabinet meeting, the president said, "We need all hands on deck to build on the recovery," and added that means using all the tools available, including executive orders.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.
All right, we're back from the break. So I was going to read you something that Obama said just recently, and it's this, and I quote, "One of the things I'll be emphasizing in this meeting is that we are not just going to be waiting for legislation in order to make sure that we're providing Americans the kind of help that they need. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive action and administrative actions that move the ball forward in helping to make sure our kids are getting the best education possible, making sure that our businesses are getting the kinds of support and help they need to grow and advance, to make sure that people are getting the skills that they need to get those jobs that our businesses are creating. I've got a phone that allows me to convene Americans from every walk of life, non-profits, businesses, the private sector, universities, to try to bring more and more Americans together around what I think is a unifying theme, making sure that this is a country where if you work hard, you can make it." And so one of the things I'm going to be talking about to my cabinet is how do we use all the tools available to us, not just legislation, in order to advance a mission that I think unifies all Americans, the belief that everybody's got to take responsibility, everybody's got to work hard, but if you do, that you can support a family and meet the kinds of obligations that you have to yourself, your family, and to your communities and your neighbors. President, sir, that is the biggest load of bullshit that I've ever heard in my entire life, and it's the biggest load of bullshit I've ever had to read. I mean, what planet is this guy from? If he needs to contact me, I want my people to contact his people because we need to talk. Who is he talking to? He's not talking to rational people, that's for sure. He emphasizes not waiting for legislation, and he's reminding us that he has a phone and a pen. He's the president of the not-so-free world, but it's a world where nonetheless everyone in the population has a phone. You can go past a food bank and see people lined up waiting to be given handouts of bags of groceries, and they're all standing there with a phone. I mean, that's nothing exceptional in having a phone, and he's certainly not doing anything meaningful for we the people with it. He's certainly terribly concerned about corporate entities and the banks that are too big to fail. But, what has he done for us lately? You all remember the case of Trayvon Martin, and President Obama, of course, got into the fray on that, and his famous words or infamous words were, "That could have been me," or "That could have been my son." Well, let's talk about the Kelly Thomas murder, shall we? The Judge William Froberg, just before a jury acquitted Kelly Thomas's killers, said this: "Among other lessons we've learned in this trial is that violence begets violence." Well, this statement was either a conscious lie or a symptom of an incurable ideological blindness. The murderous violence directed at Kelly Thomas by a half-dozen police officers was unilateral, unprovoked, and completely and utterly unjustified. It wasn't begotten by anything that he had done or failed to do. It was a manifestation of the criminal impulses that are nurtured within those who belong to the state's punitive caste, our police force, and then directed without stint or limit against those who refuse to submit to the authority of these privileged bullies. Those who've listened to my show for a while, of course, I talk fairly often about the rise of the warrior cop, and I urge people to buy a book called The Rise of the Warrior Cop by Rodney Belko, and wherein he reiterates with all the statistics and all of the numbers, all the ways in which cops are increasingly like soldiers, the ways in which they are being increasingly militarized, dressed like soldiers, armed like soldiers, and trained like soldiers, and then being sent out into our urban environment, that's our neighborhoods, and told that they are fighting a war. Urban warfare drills, urban tactics against an unseen enemy. Don't forget, in 2010, our Department of Homeland Affairs put out a list of 57 different headers under which they classified homeland terrorists. And if you go and Google, again, this list, I defy any law-abiding, average American minding their own business and living their lives to find that they are not identifiable on one of these lists. I did this experiment with lots of people that I know, and they are all absolutely horrified to discover that they actually pitch up on several of these categories or more, or up to 20, 25, 30 of these things. It's absolutely horrific. And this Kelly Thomas murder really reiterates exactly what is going on. I mean, we hear all about these arrests and innocent people being given enemas under duress and cavity searches. Cavity searches virtually on the side of the street at checkpoints. Men, women being taken down to the police department and forced to have enemas because supposedly they're hiding something. People, pregnant women being brutally beaten, forced out of their cars and beaten. Young children arrested and put in handcuffs at school for bringing a spork to school. Zero policies in our schools. It's frightening. It truly is. If you have children in school, if you have teenagers driving the streets, if you have a wife, if you leave your property, what happened to Kelly Thomas is something that could happen to you. Now, the attorney, Michael D. Swartz, who represented Cincinnati, one of the cops accused in this Kelly Thomas murder, in his summation, insisted that the unremitting assault on Thomas was carried out in strict fidelity to the training that the officer had received. And he went on to say that the officer has the right to pursue the subject until the subject is controlled, because that's how my client was trained. From his perspective, this both explained and justified the use of a taser as a club with which, in the assailant's own words, he smashed the victim's face to hell. So we're left with a spectacle of a solitary, unarmed, terrified individual being beaten and suffocated beneath more than a half-ton of armed, aggressive strangers. There's no rational basis for describing this as anything other than criminal homicide. Are we to accept the premise that police officers, as agents of government-imposed order, have an unqualified license to kill any person who resists their aggressive violence? Is there a codicil in place to that license which dictates that police who kill the public, who try to defend themselves, must be regarded as victims? And Barnett, one of the attorneys, goes on to say, listen to them during the fight, because of course someone videotaped this, and I highly recommend that you go to YouTube and actually watch this footage, because it's frightening. But he calls it a fight, so he's maintaining this pretense that this violence against a solitary victim somehow constitutes a fight. And then he goes on to say, you don't think they thought they were in the fight of their lives? These cops are armed to the gills. There's more of them. There's one victim. There's one guy. And they beat this guy to a pulp, and that pulp, that mass of humanity, died. The thrust of the defense argument was that the police were given social permission to act this way, and therefore can't be held legally accountable when they behave according to their training. And they go on to say their actions are consistent with their training, and nobody disputes that. There's this confidence that this is an endorsement of their actions rather than an indictment of the institution that has employed them. And this is going on across the United States. And I have two words for our public. It's called jury nullification. Of course, the vast majority of people do not know what this means. So, while we still have a free and unfettered internet, I urge you to go and Google jury nullification. It is very important that you understand what jury nullification is. The other thing that's important about this case is that, of course, there was a jury, and the jury allowed these guys to go free. And so I want to read this because it says it perfectly. Premeditation may not have been involved in the Kelly Thomas killing, but the perpetrators have been indoctrinated in the belief that they can employ aggressive violence at their discretion and escalate it as they see fit. This is what they've been trained for, after all. Kelly Thomas's killers will not be sent to prison, a development that will fortify and encourage their fellow state-licensed sociopaths in police departments throughout the U.S. I'll get back to the jury in a second. Roughly the same time that a jury in Orange County, California, was ratifying the murder of Kelly, Curtis Reeves was busy shooting a guy in a movie theater for texting. We'll be right back.
The Obama administration announced 2 new executive actions affecting background checks for gun buyers today. Both focus on limiting firearm access for people with mental health issues. One rule lets hospitals submit additional information about a patient's mental health into the background check system. President Obama proposed tough gun control measures in Congress last year in the wake of the Newtown school shootings, but they got little support.
Fatal shooting at a Florida movie theater. A retired cop now charged with second-degree murder after shooting a fellow moviegoer who was texting during the previews. ABC Steve Osunsami is on the scene just outside Tampa. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, George. This is a high-end theater with incredibly comfortable leather chairs and waiters and waitresses who bring food and drinks to your seat. So it was quite a shock when someone pulled out a gun. They were there to watch a war flick, the hit movie Lone Survivor.
A lot more than 10 guys. It's an army.
But long before the gunfire got started on the screen, it was happening for real during the previews. Police say it all started when retired Tampa Police Captain Curtis Reeves, seen here wearing a white jumpsuit, got fed up with the couple on their cell phone in front of him and his wife. They say that 43-year-old Chad Olson, seen in this news report from 2011, and his wife Nicole, pictured on their Facebook pages, were reportedly talking loudly and texting away.
Curtis Reeves asked him a few times to please turn off his phone. Chad decided not to.
The 71-year-old retired policeman went for the manager but came back alone. Police say the two men started arguing, Olson trying to explain that he was texting his young daughter. That's when witnesses say the retired officer pulled out a gun and aimed at Olson's chest.
Somebody throws popcorn. I'm not sure who threw the popcorn, and then bang, he was shot. He staggered 2 seats over, fell on my son and I.
Olson's wife was wounded, trying to shield her husband from the gunshot, using her bare hand.
She's a wreck. I mean, she just lost her husband, the father of her little girl.
At the theater, people who were there tried to help, including an off-duty nurse who rushed to the bleeding husband and tried to revive him but couldn't.
Something happening like that in Little Wesley Chapel, it's just, I never even thought it would happen.
As for Reeves, ABC News has learned he retired from the Tampa PD in 1993 and was instrumental in establishing the department's first tactical response team. Theme Park Busch Gardens confirms he was once their director of security. Authorities say he'll be charged with second-degree homicide. Reeves has a son who's currently on the Tampa police force. We reached out to him last night, and he told us that his father is still his idol. Reeves has a court appearance this afternoon. Robin?
Okay, Steve, thank you.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.
Okay, Curtis Reeves was a decades-long police officer who took inconsolable offense when Chad Olson used his cell phone to send text messages to his daughter in a movie theater. After Curtis Reeves, the retired police officer, returned to his seat and confronted Olson, they had a brief discussion, and after Olson refused to obey Curtis Reeves' order, and acting in fear for his life, if you can believe such nonsense, Reeves did as his decades of training dictated. He drew a firearm and shot the man dead. Reeves was arrested and faces a charge of second-degree murder. There is no measurable moral difference between the lethal actions of these individuals. However, for those who had ear to the cult of the state, Reeves committed a grave sacrilege by carrying out this lethal aggression without being clad in the vestments of the government's punitive priesthood. He was not in a military uniform, he did not have his badge, and so for this, no doubt, he is going to end up in jail. The whole thing is absolutely insane. So, as we know, one of the categories on our homeland terrorism list is returning veterans. Our soldiers who return from war are perceived by the U.S. government, U.S. Incorporated, as being of a particular threat to the U.S. government, despite the fact that no U.S. veterans have opened fire in a school, in a shopping mall. They don't pull out a gun and shoot people for texting in movie theaters. So the flip side of that should be that police officers, both in and out of uniform, both active duty and retired, are a singular threat to public safety. And we should talk about this. So anyone who wants to send me an email and discuss this, go right ahead. Something that I forgot to mention earlier is that Judge Sotomayor was complicit with President Obama in his birther issues, and Kagan was the attorney who represented Obama. She was the Solicitor General for all of the suits against Barack Hussein Obama filed with the Supreme Court to show proof of his citizenship and all of these issues, all of his birther issues. So, yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say on that. And I'm going to head into the NDAA and the NSA. So I did a poll recently where I asked 50 people if they could name how many things they could name on the NDAA. And of those 50 people, only 10 people could name one thing. And they could only name one thing. I didn't have one person that could actually name two things. So if you listen to my show, I urge you to go and find out what is in the NDAA because it is that important. It's incredibly important, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go over it again in this show. 70% of people are upset enough about what the NSA stands for and what it's been doing that they have, in a recent poll, 70% of people said that they would prefer less government oversight and more privacy because of the amount of publicity, I think, that the NSA has been getting. Meanwhile, of course, the NDAA has not had very much airtime with our mainstream media. So here's a running list of what we know the NSA can do so far. It can track the numbers of both parties on a cell phone, as well as location, time, and duration. It can hack Chinese phones and texts. It can set up fake internet cafes. It can spy on foreign leaders' cell phones. It can tap underwater fiber optic cables. It can track communications within media organizations. It can hack into the UN video conferencing system. It can track bank transfers. It can monitor text messages. It can access your email, chat, and web browsing history. It can map your social networks. It can access your smartphone app data. It's trying to get into secret networks like Tor, diverting users to less secure channels. It can go undercover within embassies to have closer access to foreign networks. It can set up listening posts on the roofs of buildings to monitor communications in a city. It can track the reservations at upscale hotels. It can intercept the talking points for Ban Ki-moon's meeting with Obama. Whoop-de-whoop. It can crack cell phone encryption codes. It can hack computers that aren't connected to the internet using radio waves. It can intercept phone calls by setting up fake bases. It can remotely access a computer by setting up a fake wireless connection. It can install fake SIM cards to then control a cell phone. It can fake a USB thumb drive that's actually a monitoring device. It can crack all types of sophisticated computer encryption. It can go into online games and monitor communications. It can intercept communications between aircraft and airports. It can physically intercept deliveries, open packages, and make changes to devices. Wow, that's what I'm going to say on that. Okay. Something about our UN Arms Trade Treaty and the way in which it targets our freedom. Well, that takes me to the Trans-Pacific Alliance, or the Trans-Pacific Pact, as it was known. It's a very, very, very important thing, this Trans-Pacific Alliance. It is the de facto rollout, red carpet, to a one-world government. The Trans-Pacific Alliance is going to single-handedly hand over the governance of local countries to the UN. Everything's going to be overseen by the UN. And, of course, a part of that is the UN Small Arms Treaty. In September of 2013, Secretary of State John Kerry journeyed to the United Nations headquarters to sign the UN Arms Trade Treaty. He said he was doing so on behalf of President Obama and the United States of America. And in that, he actually wasn't lying, because he's doing it for the United States of America, not United States of America of we the people, the landmass, only for the corporations. Secretary Kerry stated that he wanted to be clear both about what this treaty is and what it isn't. And he said it's about keeping weapons out of the hands of terrorists and rogue actors. It's about reducing the risk of international transfers of conventional weapons that will be used to carry out the world's worst crimes. This is about keeping Americans safe and keeping America strong. This is about promoting international peace and global security. This treaty will not diminish anyone's freedom. In fact, the treaty recognizes the freedom of individuals and states to obtain, possess, and use arms for legitimate purposes. Make no mistake, we would never think about supporting a treaty that is inconsistent with the rights of Americans to be able to exercise their guaranteed rights under our Constitution. Bullshit. That's all I can say about that. When we sign, when the Trans-Pacific Alliance is ratified with all of its member countries, that charter will supersede any local and domestic laws. So it doesn't matter how you vote or what you think or what the individual states want to do. You will have to, as a country, comply with these UN mandates. And if you go and you look at the language of the UN Small Arms Treaty, you will see all the language that urges compliance with the language of the UN Small Arms Treaty in the broadest possible way. So please, please, please go and Google that. Now, recently an article came out from a think tank where it was stated an extraordinary crisis is needed to preserve the new world order. And they quoted several different think tank people. And it's a very interesting document. I'm going to read you a short piece. Without an extraordinary crisis, little is likely to be done to reverse or limit the damage imposed by failed or failing governance, implying that only another 9/11 style cataclysm will enable the state to reassert its dominance while containing, reducing, and eliminating the dangers posed by the newly empowered non-state actors. They conclude that the elimination of non-state actors. Now, non-state actors are people like Bradley Manning, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and such like. Concludes that the elimination of non-state actors and empowered individuals must be done in order to preserve the new world order. A summary of their material suggestions that the Atlantic Council's definition of a new world order is a global technocracy run by a fusion of big government and big businesses under which individuality is replaced by transhumanist singularity or a one world government. I want you to know that this is a complete disinformation piece of work, although it does bring up some very salient points. And for that, I want to point out that despite what you read about Snowden, despite what we know of Julian Assange, and even of Bradley Manning, although to a far lesser degree, but certainly for Edward Snowden, there's a lot of disinformation coming our way, mixed in, of course, with a lot of truth, because that's the way it's done. So that's all I'm going to say on that. But read things like this with extreme prejudice, because these are the sanctioned think tanks of our government bodies, and they create a lot of misinformation and a lot of food for the gristmill to chew on and throw out there to really obfuscate the issues, when we should be focusing on much more important things, like the fact that we have such a militant state and our police are completely out of control. Such a travesty as the fact that we have 22 veterans dying a day on U.S. soil. If you think about the fact that 2,976 people died on 9/11, but that since then, 2.5 million people have died in wars justified by 9/11, and that since 9/11, 91.5 million people have died of hunger. You gain a little perspective on things. And these are the things that we should be talking about, not the he said, she said of these irrelevant military think tanks that the President and Congress is allowing to put out these public documents. Because I can tell you this, the real documents that Congress and the White House is discussing will never see the light of day, will never be published for people to have a look at. I've done my round of think tanks, and I assure you that these kinds of things might come across as leaked, and they might be put out there as leaked, but they are there to entertain the sheeple people, so put them aside. So I know I'm almost at the end of my show, and I didn't really get to Michelle Obama, but when they were campaigning to occupy the White House, Michelle Obama, of course, said that she was going to speak on behalf of veterans. And there's plenty of initiatives, and there's plenty of pictures of her standing with veterans. However, Michelle Obama has done absolutely nothing on the street level for veterans. So you have Joining Forces is one of hers. The Veterans Initiative is another. Veterans Program is another. And this woman needs to realize that getting things done and making changes that are proactive on the street for real people is not about a photo op situation. Of course, then we have her health initiative, which was the whole Jumpstart program, and her American Grown, How the White House Kitchen Garden Inspires Families, Schools, and Communities by Michelle Obama. While meanwhile, across the country, local governments are forcing people to pull up their vegetable gardens and calling them illegal gardens. So, as usual, I'm out of time. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week.
Guys, it's been a really busy week for news. You know, between the polar vortex freezing Niagara Falls and Dennis Rodman flipping his lid about his new best friend, Kim Jong-un, on CNN. But amidst all of this madness, there's been one story so gripping, so captivating, that it simply demanded nonstop coverage from the corporate press.
As the George Washington Bridge political retribution scandal continues to gain momentum. A total of 4 people have now lost their jobs, as Governor Christie announced today in an epic press conference.
Your thoughts about Governor Christie tonight?
Well, I thought the news conference was classic Christie. Direct, blunt, to the point.
The thing that people are hearing is that Chris Christie bullied someone. Mm-hmm. They don't like bullying. They don't like it. They don't like it when they see it in Washington. They don't like it when they see it in their own communities.
Oh my God, newsflash. You're right. This is not national news. Yes, Governor Krispy Kreme may or may not be a bully, and I'm not trying to downplay the fact that this political stunt shut down a bridge and ruined a perfectly good day for hundreds of people. But look, if we're going to start arresting peaceful protesters for shutting down bridges to prove a point, Occupy Wall Street, then shouldn't we also arrest public officials for doing the same thing? More importantly, though, why is this the controversy about Christie that the news chooses to latch onto? Where was the outrage when Christie shelled out $2 billion in corporate tax breaks to his rich friends? all the while slashing public education by $1 billion in New Jersey. But I digress. My point is that we don't need to be seeing the entire press conference on repeat. The incessant coverage is distracting us from a much larger issue. Yes, even bigger than Chris Christie himself. The TPP. You see, while all eyes and cameras were on Christie, the Senate introduced fast-tracking the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP. Yes, it's happening, guys, right now. Members of a bipartisan congressional committee took full advantage of the Christie distraction to introduce legislation that will give Obama fast-track authority to move forward with the corporate coup d'etat. See, while the TPP is being touted as a beacon for job creation, the so-called free trade agreement is anything but. Not only have negotiations been conducted almost exclusively between advisors representing powerful multinational corporations, but the talks have taken place entirely in secret. Yes, it's the big banks, global telecom companies, pharmaceutical giants, and fossil fuel corporations that are standing to benefit immensely from the passing of this deal. You know, all the corporations that we trust the most. And what the TPP would do, confirmed by portions of the leaked text, is bring about a whole slew of potentially devastating impacts that range from increased prices for medicine, erosion for internet freedoms, and unprecedented corporate power. See, at the crux of this bill is the establishing of an international trade tribunal of corporate lawyers whose authority would usurp the national sovereignty of every country involved and override domestic law if it hurts their bottom line. But because of growing awareness about the troubling aspects of the deal, these corporate negotiators have launched a campaign to force U.S. lawmakers into an up or down vote without having a chance to even review the content of this international agreement. And that's where we stand today, as senators have officially introduced the fast-track language. See, if the TPP is fast-tracked, Obama will have more leverage on the negotiating table to appease his corporate paymasters. Folks, we cannot let this happen. Fast-tracking this already conniving trade deal goes completely against democratic principles. Look, I know we don't trust Congress. Believe me, most of them are already bought and paid for. But they do ultimately answer to us. So please, please take 1 minute of your day to learn more. Visit stoptpp.org and call your representative to voice your concerns about the shady deal. Already, your voices have made a huge difference and have forced the TPP to be delayed time and again. The more light we shine on this deal will force it out of the shadows and give us a chance to have a say in our future.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.